Hello and welcome back. I'm Shayna Cersei. Thanks so much for joining me today. We are getting into our holiday watercolor wreaths part 2. So if you haven't seen part 1 already, I'll leave a link in the description, but also I'll put one right here on the video if you want to check that out. Part 1, where we paint these first 2 wreaths that you see here already completed. But we're going to get into the second set now, so numbers 3 and 4. So I'm going to jump right in here and start on my bow using raw sienna color. So this is a yellowish gold color, raw sienna. So what I'm doing here is I'm just putting a little knot or a little kind of roundish bulb at the top there with a larger kind of line down, and then adding 2 bows on one side, or 2 loops of a bow on one side and 2 loops of a bow on the other side. I'm going to go in and add detail later. You don't have to overthink this. It can be really simple. But this is going to be the ribbon at the top of my wreath, and I'm doing it in this very lovely yellow gold color. Dropping in a little extra color around the center so it's a little darker, more concentrated there. But again, I'll add some more details in to define that later on. So I put in my regular classic bow shape. And then as I go around the wreath, I'm going to be using my liner brush or my rigger brush. And I'm using a combination of cobalt blue and Payne's gray. And I will use that by adding a little bit of water to get even lighter values of it, to get various values of kind of this bluish gray color. And then I'm going to use my rigger or liner brush after I've watered this down quite a bit. I'm going to use that rigger or liner brush to get some very fine, long lines. And what I'm going to be doing is creating kind of in the real world, in the wreath kind of making world, it would be like a nest of twigs and sticks, twigs and sticks that go all the way around, crisscrossing each other to create kind of a full wreath shape. This is not rocket science, but it's the same shape over and over and over again, just how you place them crisscrossing each other that starts to build out the shape. And I continue all in one direction. I try not to be too mathematically precise of like where I crisscross them and have a few sticking out one side or the other. And I just keep filling in all the way around. And then, like, kind of after I've established the base shape here, so I've made it all the way around in a circle, I'm going to go back and start filling out the width of it by adding more next to each other, kind of overlapping each other. And what I'll do as I do this is, you'll see I'll pick up lighter versions of this color, but also some more darker concentrated versions from that little puddle that you see on my palette there, until I'm happy with kind of how robust the wreath is. You can certainly keep it very thin and very wispy, or you can keep doing this and keep building layer after layer so that it creates density as well as width to the wreath. And this I just really love. So normally it's twigs, apparently, or twigs and sticks are done in a brown shade or a brown color. But this is using something that normally has a color and then creating your own color palette for it, for the whole thing. So I'm forcing a color palette here, and then I love the gold or yellowish gold and this gray blue kind of color palette to create a real cool and wintry looking feel. So once I am happy with this, and once I'm happy with like how wide it is, how dense it is in terms of the sticks that go all the way around, or the twigs that go all the way around, then I'm going to start adding in dots that are going to be like berries, like you would see berries in a wreath, like the other wreaths that we did earlier, but they're going to remain in the color palette. So I'm going to be using darker blueberries, and I'm also going to add in some of those gold or yellow berries as we go. But they're really just going to be dots that dot around the wreath. So as I prepare to put my little dotted blueberries on my wreath, I'm going to mix up an even darker color and pick up a lot of paint so it's very concentrated, because I want these to contrast to the twigs that I already put on here. So the twigs are a lighter gray or blue. I really want these to be in the same color family, but they need to be darker or more contrasty. Otherwise, they would all blend together. So you can see here, it's a really dark color. I'm still using my rigger brush. You could definitely change to a small round brush to give you a little more control. Riggers don't have as much control unless you're making a straight line or a curving line like you did before with our branches. But to make little circles or little dots, they don't have as much control. So feel free to switch brushes. So I'm mixing up an even lighter color and putting in, it doesn't look too different here on camera, but as they dry, I know that they will be lighter. So I'm putting in some lighter valued little berry dots as well. So you can see there, they're slightly lighter blue to those really navy dark colored berries. And then I'm going to switch colors. I'm going to pick up that raw sienna again that I used for the bow, this yellowish gold color. And I am going to start to add those in as a contrasting color of berries throughout the wreath. And I think this, you could certainly have gone monochromatic with the wreath and just did different shades of the blue. But I love this contrasting color. Blue and orange are complementary on the color wheel, and those give off like a very strong dissonance between them, where this is, blue and yellow. This is a very warm yellow. It's got some orange tones to it, but it's a milder version of that dissonance. So they are not complete complementary colors, but they definitely give off that feel where it's actually quite comfortable to see them together. They give each other a lot of contrast and pop. The blue and yellow, especially because these are, it's a muted tone of blue. This is a muted tone of a yellow or warm yellow, orangish yellow. So I really just love this color combination together, and I think it gives off a really cool kind of vibe in terms of that wintry holiday spirit. So with the bow, adding some more details, you can see I've picked up some burnt sienna now. This is in fact burnt sienna, as I said earlier, which I was wrong. I meant raw sienna. But this redder color is burnt sienna, and I've just used my rigger to add some details around the bow to create some definition. But I think we're ready to jump in to our fourth wreath. We just completed our third wreath. So let's jump into the fourth wreath. Now, this one is going to be asymmetrical, meaning it's going to be more weighted for this particular composition, more weighted on the bottom left side than anywhere else on the wreath. So it's going to have a big element or embellished element on the bottom right hand side, and we're going to do that in the form of a poinsettia flower. So the poinsettia flower is just a standard petaled flower, and in fact the petals on this flower are actually leaves that turn these beautiful bright colors. So we're going to put in 5 petals on the bottom. So I found a spot on the lower left-hand side, right around like 7 o'clock, or 7 o'clock if this was a clock. And I'm going to put on 5 petals around that, leaving space in between. And you can see I'm using a smaller brush. I'm not doing these petals all in kind of 1 or 2 strokes. I'm really being careful and intentional. And the color I'm using is cadmium red. So it's a much orangier, kind of bright red, pretty opaque for a watercolor color. And I'm putting 5 petals around, leaving lots of space between, as you can see. Now, and I left the center completely open. You see I drew in the center down there. Now I'm also going to put in petals in between these flowers. But before I do that, I'm just going to pick up some cadmium yellow and drop in a couple dots of cadmium yellow in the center. I'm going to come back to this again with some other colors to fill out that center kind of stamen area in the middle of our poinsettia flower. So back to our red. So I'm going to take our cadmium red and I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson to it. I'm actually going to mix those two colors together. So alizarin crimson is a cooler red, and it's a little bit darker in concentration, not as bright or orangey as you can see here on the palette. I'm going to mix them together a little bit, and I'm going to use that color as the petals kind of secondary to the first set of petals there. So I need, if you don't have alizarin crimson and cadmium red, you need a lighter, kind of brighter, more warm or orangey red color. And then you need a slightly darker, has more blue of an undertone red for the secondary petals. So you can see here I'm just going between all of the ones I already put down and just carefully painting in those petals. Do not worry, this is not exactly how we're leaving it. I am going to go back in and add another layer to our lighter, brighter petals, the first cadmium red ones we did, to bring them more in line with the ones below. But we do want to leave some contrast. But we're going to add a little bit more texture in the next step as well. So let's finish these out, finish off adding all of these petals. And I'm also going to pick up a little sap green. I'm going to put a few little dots in the center there with my yellow that I already put down, and just add a few little dots in there to create some additional texture in that stamen area. So now phase 2 for the top layer of petals. You do have to let that top layer and really the bottom layer of petals dry completely. So this would be the time for you to make sure those are dried completely before continuing on this second step. So what I'm doing, as you can see, I'm painting a pattern on top in a darker red color. And what I'm letting show through is the lighter color on the bottom, and I'm letting that give the idea or the simulation of veins in the flower petal or in the leaf. That way, you know, those lines are creating, the lighter lines of the color underneath are creating the vein texture. So I'm really painting the negative space to what I want to try to reveal here. This doesn't have to be on this size card in this type or style. This doesn't have to be too, you know, you don't have to worry about it too much. It doesn't have to be too perfect. Just going through, leaving a little gap, angling my strokes upward to the top of the leaf so that the veins angle upward, and I'm just going to work my way through, leave a little gap, so on and so forth down each petal on this front side. And it's just creating that texture that you see, that very kind of quintessential texture that you see in a poinsettia flower. And now I'm also going to take some more of that alizarin crimson cadmium red mixture and add another layer closest to the center on the second or secondary set of leaves that I put on. So I'm going to put it closest to the center here, and then I'm going to blend it out a little bit so it doesn't have that abrupt endings, you know, you can see there at the end. And this is creating a little bit of a shadow where the petals overlap closest to the center there, and they're kind of tucked in underneath. So that's creating a little depth for us. So that's why I add that second step to the second set of petals. All right, so let's step back a little further again and look at the whole of the wreath. So we have our main focal point on the bottom left-hand corner, right around 7 o'clock if this was a clock. And now we're gonna build the rest of the wreath up and towards the top of the wreath. And what we're gonna do is create branches and twigs that, and leaves and leaf pattern that find their way away from, up and away from the main focal point, which is on the bottom there. So I'm just going to start to put in some stems and leaves that find their way up and around away from the flower. I'm always going to kind of start at the flower and start to build away from it on either side, starting at the flower and building up and away, versus kind of coming down and bringing my leaves down, pointing down towards the flower. So these are basic leaves, a stem in the middle with some small stems coming off the main stem and little leaves on the edges of them. And then after I get these in, I'm going to do this on both sides so we can kind of stay balanced. Balanced doesn't mean identical, remember that, especially when we're doing a leaf shape. We want it to hold that round feeling, so we want to make sure it still feels round as we build around that circle guideline. And we want to make sure it's balanced on both sides, that has a feeling, look and feeling of even weightedness. And then I'm also going to switch to a different element. I'm going to introduce some pine with my little tiny brush. And I'm going to mix up some dark blue with green. So that would be phthalo blue, Payne's gray, and sap green. And I'm going to put in some little pine sprigs. Also, they have their base closest to the flower or closest to the bottom of the wreath. And then they're going up and away as it goes up around the circle. And the last element I'm going to introduce is with a little raw umber, and this is just going to be a few sticks and twigs, twigs and sticks, or twicks as I said earlier. I'm never going to get over that. Kind of closing out the rest of the circle, overlapping each other. And then I am going to bring that element a little bit into the other bottom parts by just putting a few suggestions or hints of twigs and sticks down between the leaves and between the pine sprigs. It just kind of brings it all together and doesn't make it look like it's, you know, three separate parts all kind of sitting next to each other. And there you have it. That's our final and fourth idea for our wreath composition. So these are just 4 wreaths, and there's 100 different ways you can add these elements together in not wreath compositions, in other compositions. But here are 4 wreath ideas. Hopefully this is helpful in getting you started on your holiday watercolor card making plans for this holiday season. Make sure to check back on my channel throughout the next couple of weeks for even more holiday ideas. Don't forget to check the description of this video for supplies and paints that we used, as well as links to my Studio Crew classroom. The last little bit I'm going to leave you off with here is I've been stamping my sentiments into my cards or on my card faces, and I'm now using these silicone stamps that can be put on these little acrylic blocks, and you can change them out. So once it's put on, it's not there forever. You can swap them out. You can see on the left there I have a whole bunch of other sentiments that I use. I'm going to use an ink pad. This one I'm going to pick gold, and I'm going to do that top right hand wreath. So I'm going to put the sentiment in gold, and hopefully that will look nice with the gold ribbon there. Believe is the one I chose. So this is like a hand lettered believe, or it looks like it's hand lettered. And we're going to put that right in the middle. Don't know if I love the believe, but the gold is very pretty. And it's a really nice fit in the inside of that wreath. And now I just take it off, and you can go clean it off if you want, or you can just leave it there to dry. And I'm going to swap it out for a different sentiment. Let's see here. Which one am I going to pick? I think we wish you a Merry Little Christmas, or we wish you a Merry Christmas. All right, so I'm going to use this. I'm going to put that on my acrylic block now. See that? It just gets placed on. The acrylic blocks have grids on them, so you can make sure everything is straight and lined up. I'm going to use some black ink for this one, so I'm going to get it nice and inked up there. And the real trick with stamping is to really just commit to your first press. Like, don't be hesitant. I know it's really hard, especially when you've worked really hard, but if you're not using a waterproof ink, then you don't want to stamp first and then paint later. If you have a waterproof ink, you could certainly stamp first and then paint later. But these are not waterproof inks. These will get messed up if water gets on them. So just be careful of that when you are stamping. So I'm going to do this wooden rubber block stamp, this Merry Christmas, and just go for it. Press it right in there. I promise you this is straight, even though it's going to look crooked when I take it off, but it is straight because I have cut the paper above it there in a little bit of a crooked fashion. But don't worry, when I cut it out, it will be straight. And then our last one, I think I'm going to go below. Now, I'll make sure all of the supplies here are linked in the description of this video. You can go check out my supplies. Many of them are Amazon affiliate links, so it's a great help to me if you are going to be ordering on Amazon anyway. If you go through there to find some supplies and materials, because we get a tiny little commission, us creators who put out all this content for you all. And it costs you nothing extra in the long run. So that's always really helpful. So there we have it, our 4 different wreath ideas for you to try out. Thank you so much. I'm Shayna Cersei. As always, it's a pleasure painting with you. I hope these are helpful in your holiday watercard creation season. Take care, y'all.